Hey folks, today I'm going to ramble a bit about WoW's announced housing system and what it means for WoW's future overall. This is going to be a second screen type of video, so feel free to minimize and listen. Of course, if you want to watch me meander around WoW doing dailies and such, you're more than welcome to do so. I want to talk about the various directions Blizzard could go, but I want to be clear that my expectations are very low, as I've been around for Garrisons, Warfronts, and other systems that people have speculated were going to transform the game, which they failed to do. I'll get into the specifics of my theory as to why, but first I want to explain where I stand with Blizzard and why I'm making this video in the first place. World of Warcraft used to be my main game, for years in fact. To give a brief timeline, I started in February of 2005 and played until probably 3 months into Cataclysm. I eventually came back at the end of Mist of Pandaria and then played until 3 months into Battle for Azeroth. Then I skipped Shadowlands completely, the only expansion I did that for, and I returned at the end of Dragonflight. I'm not one of those players that dedicated their gaming hobby solely to WoW, and I've played other MMOs when I wasn't playing this game. But the reasons I left each time always stemmed from my disappointment in the company, as an extension of my disappointment with the game. And the reason I returned was always the promise that things have changed or gotten better. My time with WoW pre-Cataclysm will always be among my best and most cherished memories in gaming, period. Post-Cataclysm, I've frequently found myself futilely hoping that Blizzard would bring WoW back to when World of Warcraft really felt like a world of its own, and back to when it felt like WoW wasn't just another MMO, but the MMO, made with seemingly boundless passion and innovation. Now, before the eyes roll out of your heads, I know that a lot of this is me wearing the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia. But when I compare WoW and what Blizzard is today versus what it used to be, at least our perception of it, and when I look at how and why that is, I truly think it didn't have to be and doesn't have to be this way. And with new leadership, Blizzard is seemingly trying to make amends to its player base. It's possible that we could be in for a new and better era of WoW and Blizzard. Now, how does housing fit into any of this? A fair question. And my answer is how Blizzard goes about implementing it into World of Warcraft as a whole will be a solid indicator of the core of their design philosophy and how they are approaching the big picture of WoW. Housing and live service, or MMO specifically, are a system designed to provide horizontal progress to a character, not in terms of player power, but in terms of filling collections or displaying achievements. They are also a form of player expression, providing a player with space in-game catered to that player alone, and allowed to be decorated however that player wishes. For people that love roleplay and players that simply like being able to control the aesthetics of a space they own, housing has provided countless hours of creative joy and expression. In MMORPGs, housing has been a beloved feature since games as old as Ultima Online, and it has been a feature presented as a major selling point for games such as Elder Scrolls Online, Final Fantasy XIV, and even Guild Wars somewhat recently. Even WildStar, an MMO that unfortunately failed and had to go offline, is fondly remembered as having one of the best housing systems in an MMO ever. So while this feature might seem trivial to those who have no interest in owning or decorating a personal space, it's a system that undoubtedly shapes the gaming experience for a lot of players, sometimes going so far as shaping entire communities, which is such the case in Final Fantasy XIV, where housing allows for people to host events in theaters, clubs, or whatever they can imagine, because the system is that robust. This is why when I saw the announcement during the 30th Anniversary Direct, I was equally excited and trepidatious, because I know Blizzard is capable of great things. I also know they are capable of fumbling them too. And housing is one such feature that has been around in other games and done so well in them, that if Blizzard implements this system poorly, then it shows where their priorities and design philosophies truly lie. Essentially, their implementation of this feature really is a test in a lot of ways, and a signal of where they are going with the rest of the World Soul Saga and beyond. So, what do they need to get right, and what do they need to avoid with this? First, we'll start with what they need to avoid at all costs. Number 1. Limited housing. This comes from my experience playing Final Fantasy XIV. This was honestly one of my major gripes with that game's housing system as a whole. In Final Fantasy XIV, you have neighborhoods, which are essentially instanced housing quarters called wards, with 60 housing plots in each one. In each of the 5 cities that have housing districts, there are roughly 30 wards, so that amounts to 9,000 housing plots available in a game with millions of players. For a span of about 3 years, I was one of the lucky ones to have a small house, and though I had the means to upgrade to a medium or a large plot, I wasn't able to do so because there was a first-come, first-served system in place. which meant you had to be the fastest and luckiest clicker among all clickers vying for the same plot. And then when they put the lotto system in, despite my hundreds of attempts, of which you can only put your money on one house per lottery run, I never got the plot I was after. WoW absolutely cannot go this route. The fact that only a small, lucky, and dedicated few can even experience housing in a system like this, I think is wrong, especially since everyone is paying the same monthly fee. Yes, every player gets a free apartment, but you have no way to decorate the outside from there, and the space is so small there's only so much you can do with it. I highly doubt WoW will go this route, but if they do, it'll be dead on arrival. Number 2. Static placements. I think this is much more likely to happen than the former system, but I sincerely hope it doesn't. I've been browsing the forums and I see a lot of the same concerns, that the engine isn't built to support a system like housing, especially where you can decorate and move furniture around at will. If it is the case that the engine can't handle flexible placement within a personal space, which I can't personally see that being the case, then the only other option would be static placements. Meaning if you have a bed, it goes in the bed slot and you choose what kind of bed from there, but you couldn't place that bed anywhere else other than its designated slot. Somewhat like how garrisons worked with their limited slots for specific types of buildings. This would go for paintings and rugs, etc. as well. So while everyone's home would be slightly different, it would basically be the same setup with very limited avenues for creative expression. This would honestly work against the appeal of having a housing system in the first place. I think it's very important to have a flexible furniture and decoration placement system. Number 3. Over-monetization. This is the one I'm most worried about. It's inevitable that housing will be monetized to some extent, especially when we're talking about the same company that just released a $90 mount. I think to expect otherwise will only lead to disappointment. That said, if they limit that monetization to the same degree that they have the mounts and pets in store, I think that would be the best we can hope for. As long as most of the cool stuff is earnable in-game, and it isn't monetized to the degree that, say, Elder Scrolls Online is, I would say that would be fair enough. If, however, they use this as a vehicle to bolster their store with as much or more items than you can earn in-game, I think that level of greed would have players eventually stop engaging with the system that is clearly there to send more players to the store. I know I wouldn't even bother with it. Now, for the things they need to get right. Let housing be flexible for creative expression and expandable in some way, be it that you're able to build expansions onto your home, or that you can eventually earn bigger and better homes, or have homes in different locations. Variety is king in these systems. Players who are interested in housing are interested in expressing themselves via where and how they want their characters to live. This system should cater itself not only to the casuals, but to enthusiasts who want to have their own best house with all the best decorations possible, and most importantly, have it be something that can be made worthy of visiting and showing off. Garrisons had the issue of no one really bothering to visit each other's garrisons because they were all basically the same. Sure, banners would be different here and there, maybe different music was playing, but there was no room for actual creative expression. This needs to be made the most important objective for this system. Second, every single player, old and new, needs to be able to own a home, and be able to upgrade it with reasonable investment. I don't mind there being a quest involved, or some sort of achievement you need, as long as literally anyone can do it if they want to. In addition to that, houses should be upgradable and or expandable for anyone with reasonable commitment or investment. Going back to the point I made earlier, I was able to upgrade my home in Final Fantasy XIV in terms of having the gil required to do so, but the game literally would not let me do that due to its limitations. This leads right to my next point. All upgrades should be earnable in-game. I feel like this is almost futile to suggest, but I also feel it's important to add. Ideally, while homes may have a gold investment, it would be better if it was tied to achievements. Instead of needing 1,000,000 gold to purchase a home in Suramar, for example, you need the quest and reputation achievement for that expansion. This goes back to my previous point that this system is something that should be for everyone, that everyone with reasonable investment can commit themselves to without having to spend extra real-life money to do so. If this is how the system is being built, being tied to quests, achievements, and or reputations, the subscriptions and engagement for this game will grow on their own, especially if the system itself is robust and well implemented. As for professions, there's a lot of talk about adding another profession specifically for housing. While I'm not wholly against this idea and would welcome it, I think spreading the furniture and decorations across the already established professions would be a better way to go. For example, blacksmiths could make fireplaces, engineers could make lights, leather workers or tailors can make rugs, etc. Or better yet, have both. A new profession that specifically makes furnitures and decorations, but scatter a few of those things among all the other professions as well. Finally, provide some limited utility. Those of us who played through Warlords of Draenor saw and learned what happens when you give a player instance too much utility. You break the social aspect of the game, which is opposite of what you want to do for an MMO. But I think staying away from all utility is also a bad idea, as it would kill any incentive for most players to really engage with that space. So let me explain. Take for example mounts, pets, and gear as they are. Each of these provides some sort of utility, and they are readily available to show off to others. Mounts provide movement speed, pets can be collected and trained for battles, which is its own system altogether, and gear is the backbone of this game's progression system, but is able to be transmogged, allowing players to express themselves by having their characters look badass or absolutely ridiculous. Each of these examples have a utility which makes players want to engage in altering their aesthetics. They tie into how the player plays the game. My suggestion is to cut back on what Garrison's offered, but iterate on that system just a tad. So here's my list of what I'd love to see in this, and keep in mind, I'm not saying these have to be standard, but they should be at least earnable. A warband and a personal bank, but no guild bank and no auction house. A profession workshop or workstation. Workstations in the major cities will still be viable because they'll be next to the auction house. Assuming housing is instanced and not next to an auction house, this should be fine. A rested bonus, though this should go without saying. Perhaps a slight buff in reputation gains when you're at max level. That works like the rested bonus for XP. And a barber or cosmetics mirror where you can change your appearance. These next few suggestions aren't necessities, but things I personally would love to see. And I realize at least one of them is probably controversial given the Garrison PTSD, but I'll put it out there anyway. First, having an outside of the house, including a yard that you can decorate. I think it would go a long way if that space was available to us as well. Second, if there is going to be gardening, either in our yard or inside the house, which I hope there is, have a system where you can go out in the world and get certain seeds, not tied to professions or power, that you can cultivate and grow for more decorations, or even for spices or garnishes that you can use for cooking finishing reagents, or special bait for fishing that might allow you to go out in the world and fish up junk to use as decorations. Obviously nothing that can be tied to player power, but which is nice to have. Finally, and here's the possibly controversial bit, the one part of the Garrison system that they nailed, at least for me specifically, was the NPC collection system. If our housing can be expanded into a keep or a Garrison 2.0, barring all the things that broke WoW during that expansion, I think having NPCs you can collect from quests or events in the world would be awesome. Gearing and leveling them up in a mission table in an evergreen system I think would add yet another layer of fun and possibility to WoW's housing, with the expectation that the rewards from those tables are not going to trivialize endgame pillar content. Again, controversial, but I would even go so far as to have an alternative to world quests, that if you level up your keep and NPCs and gear them well enough, that they can handle the world quests for you, and you can focus on the content you really want to do, like delves, raiding, or PvP. I know the main argument against this is, but there will be no one out in the world. To that I say, no one talks to each other anyway. And there will still be people farming materials and doing world quests themselves anyway, since it would be much faster and probably more rewarding than waiting for your NPCs to do them. I'm just offering an alternative for people like me that don't really like doing world quests and would much rather log in and do a delve without having to do a bunch of other crap I have no interest in, just for 4 keys a week. But like I said, that was my dream big portion, and I have no expectation whatsoever that any of these things will be put in the game. To wrap this all up, if Blizzard implements housing with at least the spirit of my suggestions, where it's not gated or limited or overly monetized, where it's something that we as players can truly express ourselves with via creative placements in a system that allows for unbound flexibility, and have it be a system housing enthusiasts can hone in on the same way transmog, pet, and mount enthusiasts can, then I think Midnight is going to be a hell of an expansion for us, and Blizzard is absolutely back on the right track in terms of bringing WoW back to being a player-centric game rather than a business-centric one. And I, as jaded as I've become, would actually start considering that maybe there's a much brighter future for this game than I thought. That said, if they do botch this via the various ways I mentioned in this video already, then I think it's very safe to say this will end up being Garrison's 2.0 in the worst way possible. We'll just have to see though. For now, I'll remain hopeful, but very much reserved in expectations. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like, subscribe, and let me know what you think. My thoughts and opinions mean nothing without yours in the comments below. So, be well, take care, and keep chill all.